sacrifices, ritual purity, impurity, and so on. All the things that people mostly want to skip if they're trying to read the Torah. It seems rather dull. So what I want to do tonight, what I plan to do, is I wanted to give a little general introduction to the themes of the Book of Vayikra. Because we already had a whole session about 2 years ago, even on sacrifices. And we'll come back to that another time. But I want to just look at the book in general. So first of all, let's talk about the historical movement. Bereshit moves us essentially about 2,200 years. Well, at the end of Bereshit, all the brothers, including Joseph, died. So that brings us to 2330. Equivalent, the way we would count 1430, 1440 BCE. So it takes us from creation, which is nominally 3760. So it takes us more than 2,500 years. The book of Devarim, the last book of the Torah, takes us 37 days. Shemot takes us 2 years. Shemot takes us from longer. Shemot takes us from the birth of Moses, or from the enslavement of the Jews, which takes place again about 130, 140 years before they leave, because as long as any of the patriarchs were alive, the enslavement didn't happen, as long as the tribes were alive. So the Shemot takes us about 140 years, 142 years. Not as long as Bereshit, but a long time. And since Moses is burned in Shemot, actually, and he's 80 years old when he returns to Egypt, so the end of Shemot takes 3 years, the year before the Exodus and 2 years afterwards. The book of Shemot ends with the building of the Mishkan, which is just about a year after they left Egypt. The book of Bamidbar takes us 39 years. It takes us from when they finish building the tabernacle until they're right before Israel, right facing the land of Israel. It takes us 39 years, from the Mishkan, which was built a year after Pesach, all the way to entering the land. And Devarim, which is Moses reviewing what happened, takes us 37 days. Now, the book of Vayikra, essentially, so there's one story in Vayikra that doesn't have a place. But historically, the only historical events in Vayikra that are a continuation of a narrative from Shemot and Bamidbar is the dedication of the temple. And we had 7 days of dedication. Then there's the 8th day, which is also the day that Nadav and Avihu went into the temple and died because they entered the Holy of Holies without being told to. And in Parshat Naso, we pick up with the gifts of the 12 heads of the tribes, which the first of those gifts took place on the 8th day of the consecration, indeed on the first day of Nisan. So therefore, in the book of Vayikra, so Devarim moves 37 days, Bamidbar moves 39 years, Shemot moves 140 years, Bereshit moves about 2,700 years. Vayikra, the narrative of the biblical account, moves 1 day, from the 7th day to the 8th day. So the whole book of Vayikra, which is a relatively big book of the Torah, the narrative moves 1 day. Why? Because all the rest of the Torah, there's a lot of narrative. Vayikra, other than the events surrounding the dedication of the tabernacle and the deaths of Nadav and Avihu, history doesn't move at all. It's entirely a discussion of, for lack of a better word, holy things. And essentially, in Vayikra, there are a series of holinesses. The first holiness, and I'm going in order, the first holiness is that of the temple, that of the Mishkan, and later the Beit HaMikdash, and of the priests. It's the holiness of the temple where God was manifest, where the Jews would gather together to be in God's presence, to feel God's presence. So it includes the priests, the laws related to the priests, and the laws related to the gifts that we give to the temple and the priests so that they can concentrate on facilitating the Jewish people's spirituality and so on. It's all the offerings, so the temple and the priests and how we support them and how we bring sacrifices. That's the first holy thing. The holy place of the temple and the sanctified people within the Jewish people, the Kohanim and Leviim. That's subject number one, which is the holy place and the holy people. The second kind of holiness you have is the idea of Tahara, ritual purity and impurity, such as the Tzarat, the Mitzorah is called a leper, but he's not a leper, but the person who speaks ill of others and acquires this illness, which makes him separate from the people. At any rate, it's the idea of ritual purity and impurity. Tumah and Tahara, which, as we explained in the past, doesn't actually mean purity and impurity. But it's the idea of a spiritually elevated and spiritually disconnected states. So you have the laws of the purity of a dead body and of animals and so on. So you have the laws of ritual purity and impurity. That's the second thing. So there's the temple and its people. There's the laws of ritual purity and impurity. That's the second holiness, the holiness as if it were of the self. The third kind of holiness is the holiness of the land. There's a whole bunch of laws related to the land of Israel, to the things that you can and cannot do on the land in Israel, the sabbatical year, the Jubilee year. So the land of Israel, the obligation to leave gifts for the poor when you harvest your field. There's all kinds of special obligations on the land. So the third aspect of Vayikra is the land. So you have the temple, you have ritual, you have the self, and then you have purity of the land, which in this case, means the proper care and behavior and so on, and what you can grow and cannot grow, and which ways you can grow it. Purity and impurity is not the same as holy and unholy. And the next idea you have, holiness not of the self, that's ritual purity and impurity, but holiness of behavior. And there's two aspects of holiness of behavior. One is kosher, and one is the relationships that we form, we may form, or we not form. The idea that the two most fundamental facts of human life are that you need energy, you need to eat, you need to live. Before and after everything, and you can survive for, depending where you live, quite a bit of time without shelter, a great deal of time without the internet, and so on. But you need to eat. That's the most basic, and it's sort of expressive of the basic human needs. And secondly, if you want human beings to continue, you need to reproduce. So the fundamental state of the human body, the Vayikra talks about the holiness of reproduction, which means the holiness of marriage and permitted and forbidden relationships, and the holiness of our sustainment, which is the idea of kashrut. So that's the self. So you have the holiness of the self, of the human experience, which purity and impurity applies to many things. This is the holiness of the experience of living as a human being in a body. And then last of all, you have the question of the holiness of society. Because in Vayikra there's a whole bunch of laws about how we're supposed to treat each other in social interaction, in business, and so on and so forth. So there's the holiness of the temple, there is the holiness of the self, which is the holiness of the land, there's the sanctity of the human experience, which is not about being pure or impure, it's about the fundamental facts of eating, of sustainment and reproduction. And last of all, you have the holiness of society, the way we ought to treat each other, both in social interaction and financial interaction. These are the elements of the Book of Vayikra. And that's why the book moves so little, because it's about timeless things. It's about the idea there's a holy place, that we are intrinsically holy, that our fundamental experiences are holy, that the land is holy, and ultimately there's such a thing as holy social interaction, so holy economic interaction. And this is the great theme of Vayikra, that all aspects of life are sanctified, because there is no natural experience literally from life to birth to death that isn't covered by one of these things. Think of anything, so when a person dies, there's this particular law of spiritual purity, impurity. When a person is born, there's an obligation to give a boy a brit. There's an obligation to celebrate with a sudah. there's an obligation to bring a sacrifice if the temple's standing after the birth of a child. So a child has a right to some of the land. In sustaining the child, you'll sustain the child with kosher food, but also with kosher money. The point being that even though Vayikra seems to be very esoteric, in reality it deals with the human experience purely, in a way that none of the other Chumashim do. They all have laws, but this is the idea that the human experience is intrinsically holy, and society is holy, and that there's a place in the world that expresses holiness, and there are people who are devoted to living that way in a way that helps everyone else out. These are the themes. These are the great themes of Vayikra. Essentially, that holiness, which means to say separating yourself from the ordinary and connecting what seems to be ordinary with a greater purpose, is available at every possible aspect of life. And that's why, in a sense, Vayikra begins by talking about the temple and ends by talking about your fields. Because if you really absorb what's there in the temple, the way you behave in your fields will be different. So this is the book as a whole. It's interested in the idea that we can strive for holiness everywhere under all circumstances. And what does holiness mean? Taking the ordinary and giving it meaning. And that's how we begin. We begin with talking about a sacrifice, the korban. And the korban is a lamb or a cow. You're taking an ordinary animal like all the other ones, or an ordinary handful of flour, if it's a poorer person. And you're making that the centerpiece of the interaction, the interface between God and the Jewish people. Why do we need laws about how to behave in the market? Anyone can make laws. We need laws how to behave in the market because we need to know that it's not merely laws of convenience to prevent people from killing each other, but because the act of trading honestly is an act of bringing God into the everyday of the marketplace. So this is the great theme of the Book of Vayikra. Which now brings us to a very interesting question. Many of the things in Vayikra are societal. We talk about when people make promises and donations, they have to keep it. We assess them. Right away it says, when the person promises, you bring him to bring an offering to the temple, you bring him. What is to say you bring him? He'll come. The answer is that even if he gets cold feet, we make him come and do it. Which brings us to an interesting question that I've been discussing with various people this week. In any society, we make people do certain things that we think are very important for society. They can start with dogs and cats. If someone owns a dog or a cat, we don't allow them simply to put it outside and say, okay, I don't want you anymore. You took responsibility for that creature. You have to take responsibility for it. You can't just leave it there. Certainly we do that with our children. But there are a lot of other aspects of duress, of making people do things by whatever the particular threat is, by physical force, by threat of imprisonment, by threat of ostracism, whatever it may be. So I think it's interesting. So a guy promises on his own to bring a sacrifice. He has the means to, but he decides not to. So we say, no, we're going to bring you. You have to come. We're going to take your cow and you have to come along. You promised, you can afford it, you have no immediate thing. Keep your promise. So the question is, given the fact that we want people to choose to do what's right, what place does duress have? What place does forcing someone to do something have in the context of what the Torah is seeking? Granted, you have the right to stop someone from doing something wrong that might harm another person. But why would I make someone fulfill a commitment that they made already. Let them not fulfill their commitment. Well, why do I care? Why would I make someone fulfill a commitment? Why would I make someone, like, for example, there's a rule. I mean, it's sort of like taxes. If someone is assessed to give charity, because we need charity, and in the community, where the community is running itself, was an autonomous Jewish community, we can the same way the IRS can, we can confiscate someone's property if they refuse to give their fair share to charity. And sort of we're running our own society. So what's the value of this charity if you made the person give it? So this is the interesting question. What place in general in a society, what advantage there could possibly be for making someone do something? This is true of any society. Why do we make people do things they don't want to do? Every society does it. Why? There's a new rule in Newton. You have to shovel your sidewalk. I don't want to shovel my sidewalk. Why does the city try to make me do it with a fine?
For the common good.
So is the common good a reason to take away someone's free, someone's?
Fall, you need to have taxes, pay for the police or the firemen.
What about as we've had cases of forcing someone to more common in Europe, or we've had it with people with kids, forcing someone to take medical treatment. We do it. The person doesn't want to be treated.
We don't force people, we might force their children.
Right, but in some other places, though, if you don't want the treatment you clearly need, in other countries, in Europe, there are countries where they'll decide you're incompetent. You're mentally incompetent and make you take treatment. That's all the dissidents ended up in psychiatric asylums in Russia. Anyone who didn't like the Soviet paradise was clearly crazy, right? Does duress have a place? We can force someone to pay child support, right, to the benefit of their children. But Maimonides actually argues that forcing someone to do what's right is not merely to benefit the person or forcing them to support their children, to give his wife a divorce, and so on. In all these cases where we force someone to do something, that in essence, we don't force people to do things merely because it helps other people. We force someone to do something because it helps them. And Maimonides has this very interesting idea that really people are fundamentally good. So if this guy doesn't want to listen to what's right because the rabbinic court told him to support his children and give his wife a divorce or whatever it is, we should pressure him until he does it, because really he wants to do what's right. And what's right? Well, we're commanded to follow the dictates of a duly constituted rabbinic court and so on. Why isn't he listening to what's right? We know what's right. Because he's let his negative inclination, his other dark side get the better of him. So in other words, really he wants to do what's right. The problem is he's let his ego, his anger, whatever it is, get in the way. So by putting pressure on him, by forcing him to do it, what are we essentially doing? Where people are stubborn, people don't do what they're supposed to because they get some perverse pleasure, some perverse power out of it. So if I impose pressure on you in such a way that you're no longer comfortable, so your discomfort at your choice now cancels out your comfort. Once you're no longer comfortable doing it, what you're doing is what really deep down you wanted to do anyways. Because people are fundamentally good. So we don't accept that someone fundamentally wants to do evil. We say that they've been distorted, maybe by their own choice, but by listening to little voices inside them they shouldn't listen to. So this is, of course, an idea that has to be looked at sparingly. But there is this premise that the best thing in the world is for everyone to do the right thing because they choose to do so. And granted, there's an argument that anytime your behavior affects someone else, then it's not your free choice purely anymore. But there is this idea in Judaism, which is derived from this verse here in this book, in the beginning of Vayikra, that we bring him if he gets cold feet and decides not to bring his sacrifice. That even though ideally we want a person to do what's right because it's right on their own, in the end, if I get someone to do something by putting pressure on them, nevertheless, there's some advantage to this because what they're doing is what deep down they want to do. Because it's impossible to conceive that a person doesn't want to do the right thing at the deepest level of their self.
Sounds like an exorcism in a way.
What?
It sounds like an exorcism.
Yeah, in a way. Typically speaking, it's not so simple that you can force someone to benefit someone else. But where it's for their own good, and there is actually an interesting idea. There's a very interesting concept which says that we can acquire a advantage for someone not in their face. So, for example, let's say that I'm going far away, to some other country, won't be back for many years. But I have a good friend, I want to give him something. So I give it to you and I say, acquire this for this other fellow. Now Yuri didn't know that I planned on giving him something. Normally, to acquire something for someone else, he has to make you an emissary. But since if he would know that he was getting this precious thing, he would happily do so. Anything that is a benefit for someone, we can unilaterally, as long as we know that it's an unequivocal benefit, we can unilaterally become their emissary and stand in their place, right? So to receive a gift, you can receive a gift for Yuri, even though Yuri doesn't know anything about it. And you acquire it because to acquire some advantage, some merit, something positive that we can do for someone without their knowledge at the time. Now this becomes so. Part of the idea is that when I'm behaving in a way I choose to behave in a negative way, what's happened is that I've let I've let my negative self out and I've imprisoned my good self. So when I make you do the right thing, your consciousness may not be there, but I am giving you a merit even though you don't know right now it's a merit. Right now you're bummed out that I made you support your children or whatever it is. But the reality is this is who you are. You are a good person. Something is obfuscating it. Is it by your choice? Maybe. But the fact is that even if you choose to do what's wrong, that's still not you.
How do you know?
This is why that's why this is something that's done at the direction of a court with an understanding of what's right and what's wrong. In other words, you don't decide yourself what you want to make someone do. There are laws.
I mean, how do you know that we're essentially good?
Oh, we know that.
It's like complete conjecture. You never give the person a chance to come forth. You're just saying you got to do it, so there's no opportunity to know. Oh yeah, that person's good.
Well, the idea that they're fundamentally good is a theological idea. What I mean to say is that you and I probably can't tell the difference between someone whose goodness came out because we made them do something and someone who's just a plain unpleasant person. But in other words, it's a fundamental premise that people are intrinsically good because God created people for a purpose, and since everyone has a positive purpose, the fundamental nature of their creation is good. I mean, you really see this in the very first story of someone doing something wrong. Think of the story of Adam and Eve, right? So we know they did something wrong by eating from the tree because God told them not to. That's a good arbitration of something wrong. If the creator of the universe, who made the universe, says something's wrong, one assumes that it's wrong. But Adam and Eve didn't get together themselves and decide to eat from the tree, right? A snake came along, which is, symbolic of the evil inclination. In other words, without a snake, they were never going to be tempted to eat from the tree. Now we have our own private snake. We have a good inclination, evil inclination since that moment. But the fact is, if we look at the people at the moment of their perfection, there's no intrinsic evil, it's extrinsic. Because the person is fundamentally, essentially good. If people weren't fundamentally, essentially good, we wouldn't need a snake to make you do what's wrong. You could just rely on your own evil. But the answer is that until they did that business with the tree, there was no intrinsic evil. There are a lot of gaps in the story of creation. God did not give us a comprehensive history book. God gave us a set of lessons that we need to learn from about creation. So from the beginning, there's this idea that you need a snake to get people to do something wrong. You need this evil voice. It follows that God wants us to know that the intrinsic way people are designed, that who their fundamental self is good. Not indifferent, good. It's only by eating from the tree that they get this mixed up sense of good and evil. Why do they know they were naked after they ate from the tree? The embarrassment comes from all the embarrassment people typically have. The fact that most people have a certain sense of modesty is a sense of all the negative things, all the negative connotations that exists in the possible way that intimacy between people can develop. And I've called intimacy, but there's a lot of very negative and ugly things that can happen. Before they ate from the tree, they didn't see that. They only saw the positive side of the human nature. They didn't see any of the ugly, exploitative things because they were fundamentally good. Once they ate from the tree, they saw these dark possibilities. There are belief systems that will tell you that this shows us we're fundamentally originally evil. We say no. The fact that you need a snake tells you that we're fundamentally good. Otherwise, you wouldn't need a snake. And indeed, the connection between that and Vayikra is that the idea of the temple is to rectify the golden calf and the sin and the business with the Garden of Eden. It's designed to fix those things. How does it fix those things? Essentially by creating a space in which you can feel holiness without any barriers. But at any rate, the fact that people were created incapable of choosing evil with that outside voice tells us we're fundamentally good. One other theme that emerges from sort of Vayikra as a whole is that the primary actors, almost everything that takes place in the Book of Vayikra, are Aharon and his sons. Even though Moshe received the Torah, but down the road, Moshe and his descendants are no different than any other Jew. But in the Book of Vayikra, the Kohanim, the priests, are given a very core role that extends throughout Jewish history, from the beginning to the end. That Moses is crucial, but Aaron in the end is more crucial because it's the Kohanim who make all this stuff in the tabernacle and temple happen. So even though Moses talked directly to God, we're told that the characteristic, tradition tells us that Aaron's characteristic was that Moses told us the truth. But Aaron, it said, pursued peace. He always sought to find ways to bring peace between people, to reconcile people. Indeed, the purpose of all the sacrifices and atonement in the temple is to reconcile the Jewish people with God, and so on. That Aharon was about reconciliation. And more than that, all the very intense levels of tumah, which is again not impurity, but they're healed, they're solved by a ritual that involves the priest. In essence, the cities of refuge, where someone who killed someone inadvertently can go to be protected from the angry relatives, is also run by the priests and the Levites. In other words, the enduring thing, Moses, God talked to, it's wonderful, but what endures is this quality of reconciliation. And that's another thing we often mix. In Vayikra, the sacrifices are about reconciliation, making whole what's broken, all these various sin offerings and so on. All the discussion of ritual purity and impurity, of Tumah and Tahara, in Vayikra, is about how you solve those things, how you restore someone to a state of purity. All the discussions about the land is how all the original owners get their land back, how everyone gets a share in the land, how the land gets to rest, how the poor get a share, and so on. So if you think about it, the other big deal in Vayikra is reconciliation. And it's Aaron and his descendants who are the ones who are the vehicles for this. The Kohanim retain their important role throughout Jewish history, whereas Moses has a very crucial role, but it's not an ongoing one. Whereas Aaron's descendants are among us and serve that function. The temple's rebuilt, they'll have an even greater function. So the other aspect of Vayikra is that things get broken. The pure becomes impure. People who are righteous sin. The winds of the economic vagaries of the economy drive people off their land. The poor are hungry, and Vayikra is all about rectifying that, atoning for the sin, purifying the impure, restoring the land to the person who had it, ensuring that the poor don't go hungry, and promoting the harmony between people by ensuring that they treat each other fairly in the marketplace and in social interaction and so on. And who's the king of reconciliation? Aaron's greatness is that he always sought to find reconciliation, it says, between one person and his fellow, between parent and child, between husband and wife. That's Aaron's big deal. So the other big story of Vayikra is this idea that things get broken, but they can be fixed. To say that things should be a certain way, well, that's the rest of the Torah. It tells us all the things that we're supposed to do. The idea that people are intrinsically good, but will nevertheless get caught up in various snakes, and that life is such that there's ups and downs and moments of life and moments of death. All those things have reconciliations. All those things have the capacity for fixing. And that's what Vayikra is. Matter of fact, Vayikra begins with the word Vayikra. God called Moses. Who do you call? Someone who's far away. In this case, it's Moses, human being, God is God. So you're calling out very, very far. But that's what Vayikra is. It's the call to someone who's far away to come close and be reconciled. And as we go through the book this year, you'll see we're going to look at all the different ways in which things are broken and they get fixed, in which things need reconciliation and healing. And that's really what this book is about. Once you understand that holiness is not a straight line, but that there's ups and downs, and that one of the most important parts of holiness is acknowledging the fact that either for within our control or beyond control we fall down, and that those things can be rectified and those things can be reconciled. We live in an imperfect world, but it doesn't mean we can't fix it. And that's the essence of Vayikra. To be blunt, we live in an imperfect world where the best system involves winners and losers, so we have to cushion the effect and make losers suffer as little as possible, as if it were. With every new life comes a degree of pain and of sadness. And that's where the idea of the atonement, right? That's where the atonement comes from. That's where the purification comes from. Everything positive has potential negative side effects. And every one of us isn't perfect, and therefore we occasionally crash. So the goal of Vayikra is one, to not accept the world as it is, but to tweak it and adjust it and tinker with it, as the Torah commands us, in such a way that we have the benefits of the way the world is, but not too much of the suffering. That's goal number one. And goal number two is that even if it's not inevitable, we choose the wrong thing, that it's always possible to rectify. These are the great themes of the Book of Vayikra. And we'll see them one by one as we go through it.
I still don't understand why, right in the middle, why do you say that Moses is not that important? And Aharon?
Going forward. In other words, Moshe receives the Torah. The Torah is Moshe's Torah. Moshe is the most important single figure. But he creates a fundamental transformation. Aaron and his descendants are with us all along. We need Kohanim throughout history. Whether for Birchat Kohanim, Pidyon Haben, we hope to have a temple. In other words, the Kohanim and those who act like Kohanim, the work of the Kohanim, which is, Moshe gave us the Torah, he gave us the truth. But how you deal with that truth and how you get back to the truth because we're messy and we screw up and so on, that's what Aaron does. The priest, the Kohen, is always with the people. Aaron's work continues today. Moshe did his work and it's done. Nothing, right? Moshe's revelation is not challengeable, right? But what we have Moshe with us every day. But we don't have Moshe, we don't have more Moshes. We don't need more Moshes. Anyone who claims to be Moshe is a liar. But we need Aaron's every day. That's what I mean. That the people who do what Aaron did are with us today. We need Kohanim, we need conciliators, we need leaders, right? There's Kohanim and there's figurative Kohanim, the people who are the guides to the Jewish people and so on. Those we need every day. That work continues. We're interpreting Moshe's work, but Aaron's work is actually happening.
It's not necessarily Kohanim right now.
Right, but it's people who fulfill that role, and yes, for certain things we do need Kohanim. And we expect the temple to be restored, and we'll have Kohanim again. But the actual work of being Moshe, we don't have. We have the Torah. The actual work of being Aaron, we do have. One of the Hebrew names of Vayikra is the rabbinic names is the Torah Kohanim, the law of the Kohanim. Basically, God has a perfect vision of how things should be. And there are all kinds of things that break that perfection. Our choice, the vagaries of life, the nature of society, politics, the economy, and it's our job to essentially take that imperfect reality and mold it in such a way it should be as close as possible to what Hashem wants. On another level, Moshe tells us the way things should be. Aaron actually makes them work. But Vayikra is about this idea.
Is there any commentary about Vayikra being right in the middle? Just composition?
Well, it's the idea that it's the core. What takes place in Vayikra is the core. Even the mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself, which Rabbi Akiva says is the core of the whole Torah, is right there in Vayikra. Another aspect, of course, is that when we talk all about the Beit HaMikdash, people don't realize that this idea of creating a holy space, that really the Beit HaMikdash needs to exist within each one of us also. It needs to be a physical space, but also needs to exist within each one of us. But at any rate, it's not that Moses is less important, is that his work is the idea of creating something unique that can't be changed. Aaron's work is ensuring that uniqueness works for everyone in all times and all places, and even when they mess up.